Welcome to our podcast series, Token Jester, an Insight into Outsider Dance. I'm Aishani Ghosh and I'm your host for this series. I'm a company artist with Seeta Patel Dance, but I'm also a freelance artist, practitioner and researcher. Token Jester, an Insight into Outsider Dance delves into the UK and the South Asian dance industry and also gives a bit of insight into Bharatanatyam, but it's so much more than that. And it's just a space that we wanted to create to help people connect and to open up conversations in an industry that can be isolating. So in this episode, I'll be talking about the Guru Shishya mentality that we have in many Indian classical practices with Seeta Patel. Hi, Seeta.
Hi, Aishani.
How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good. Cold.
Yes. Yeah. So it's really nice to have you back with us today. And like we said, we're going to talk about the Guru Shishya practice. And maybe the best way to start is to explain what that Guru Shishya means and how, in a lot of our Indian practices, how that manifests.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big subject,
Yeah.
and I know it can be something that is possibly controversial to talk about in different ways because it's such a long-standing root of our practices in South Asian classical dance forms, especially, but music as well. Um, Basically, I'd say from my kind of perception of it and limited knowledge in many ways, I'm not a scholar, is that the guru is as important or is considered as important as your own parents. They're revered and in the kind of shape a young person as much as a parent would, and that's why it's given such an importance in our practice, and it's beyond what we would consider a teacher in the Western sort of context. I think that there's definite sort of aspects of what is considered a guru in spiritual relationships and spiritual sort of journeys as well, religious journeys. And so I think these things all kind of meld together and kind of manifest in different ways in, depending on whether it's a religious guru or if it's a guru that's teaching you dance. And the Shishya part of that, Guru Shishya, is the student.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's not possible to really reduce it or sort of contract it into such one dimensional, the teacher teaches and the student learns. I think it is a much more complex relationship, and it's evolved over time. It's evolved within the diaspora as it's sort of coming into contact with different pedagogies and different ways of thinking. And I mean, the internet has impacted it a lot. Let's be honest.
Yeah,
now there's YouTube
definitely.
and there's other ways of learning beyond one-to-one sort of connection in person. And I think that we're in a really strange place with that. I think that we are often brought up to, especially in the South Asian sort of part of the world and culture, to respect our elders and to, kind of be unquestioning and just absorb without any challenge. And I think that's where we sort of find ourselves, in a bit of friction as times are changing.
Definitely. And it's like you're saying, actually, migration has impacted it as well a lot in terms of people are moving cities now, so it's not always possible to continue a Guru Shishya mentality or practice, should I say, all the time. And I question whether you think to continue practicing the art form, you always need this way of learning to continue it.
I mean, I think that there are a lot of beautiful things about having the support of a guru and someone that can nurture you and guide you with knowledge. And as you grow as an artist, as you grow as a student, as an artist, as a person, needs shift. And sometimes there, the journey isn't just so linear as you are when you're younger, when I guess the gap between simply absorbing and having more questions as you become more curious and as you are experiencing new things, and how that relationship kind of needs to change, if anything, geography aside, just individuals growing and experiencing new things, the learning has to shift. And often I think that's where there are issues. So yes, of course, if you move away from where your teacher is and you have to find other ways of connecting, obviously there's, like I said, there's internet, there's Zoom, there's online classes happening galore, and there are ways now that there weren't for a long time to connect with your teachers, with time differences, with geographical differences. But I think the bigger gap, more than time and space, is the growth and the curiosity that comes as you develop your journey as an artist. And I think that's where sometimes, and again, it's different for everyone, people have different experiences, it can feel like you need something different, or it can feel like you don't connect in the same ways, you can feel lost again. And this is a whole journey of like losing and finding and finding different ways sometimes. And I think when I speak to young dancers who are sometimes struggling with this sort of thing, for whatever reason, it's not always something that has animosity linked to it. Sometimes it is just, an internal sort of disconnection that they're finding themselves in. I think it's about finding your relationship with the dance directly. And that's a difficult thing to sort of suggest or talk about, because we're so sort of groomed to accept this knowledge, and in an unchallenging way often, that when we're left without that vessel of knowledge or that direction of knowledge coming into us, to be more proactive and seek it, to look for the safety that you had before and find that elsewhere, is often, it's difficult, if not impossible sometimes.
Definitely.
And I think that I encourage really a change in perspective around your relationship to the dance form that you've loved for so long. And how do you put into place things that are practical, so it's not just something that's in your mind, but how might you continue your practice without the support of a teacher in the room with you? How might you work with peers? How might you do something? And it isn't to replace the thing you had, it's just that you might need to find another way to connect with your dance and with your art.
That's a really important point, I think, because your connection to the art form and to what dance means to you maybe per se isn't thought about in the beginning of your training. So then when you reach an age where you're thinking about, what is this dance form to me? How do I want to bring it to life? How do I want to create with it? How do I want to connect with my peers with it? Those questions often, or maybe not for everyone, can lead to a disconnect, because that questioning isn't always, not that you need to be taught how to question, but to even think that you can question sometimes. That's a really interesting point. And I guess for me, it's also in how the UK dance industry, and I say UK because that's my knowledge, is set up. It's not necessarily that, you can put on a margam every day or every month and have a sustainable career that way by doing margams. And you have to adapt with the fact that we're in a different country, with times, how to create within the art form itself, because it's a very different process to creating within the traditional Margam setting, and how do you think SPD is trying to, like you're saying, create a sustainable practice that could work for you, might not work for someone else, to help bridge this gap slightly?
Oh, I mean, these are such big things, and it's so individual for everyone, depending on their financial situation, on their caring situation. Do they have other responsibilities? I think we put aside a lot of kind of the logistics and the realities of things like this when we're talking about practicing an art form, because there's a sort of glamour around just, sort of doing your sadhanariyas, whatever, in this golden environment where you don't have any responsibilities and you don't have any bills to pay and things like this. And in many ways, I think that is an encapsulation of quite an elitist mentality. And I think what coming from a background that hasn't been lucrative, or it hasn't been financially sort of comfortable for most of my life, I think that I do come at it from a different perspective. I would love to be able to just practice all the time and afford a space to do that. I've never been in a living situation where I can even dance at home.
Mm-hmm.
I can do yoga because it's nice and quiet, but I can't dance at home.
Yeah.
And I know many people have the luxury of doing that, which is great. And we dance in small spaces and we can make it work.
Yeah.
But I think in order to, really flourish, like, you do need to put resource in, and it is prohibitive sometimes. And I think that, again, as your dance journey moves forward, or I don't want to say forward because it can move in any direction, but as you go along your dance journey, you have to grapple with so many other things, logistically speaking. But then on top of that, you do, like I said, you have other experiences which might open you to, the political imbalances, the societal imbalances, the kind of, so many things that that a form like Bharatanatyam is complicated.
Yeah.
Some people just struggle internally with practicing a form that has the history that it does,
Mm-hmm.
and how we negotiate that as politicized young people.
Mm-hmm.
I say we, I don't feel young anymore, but do you know what I mean? Like contemporary individuals,
Yeah.
where we're often bombarded, and it's nice to be able to go away, let's say for a few weeks or a few months, to completely isolate yourself and immerse yourself in the world of dance, which many people do. I've done it in the past. If we can afford to go to India and work with our teachers if they're there, or wherever they might be, and really just immerse yourself in processes of dance and Bharatanatyam and the stories and the details and the nuances. I mean, that's beautiful. But in and of itself, it's not really a realistic option for many people.
Yes.
For a long-term
Sustainability.
sustainable career. And if you can, then great, maybe that is the way. I wish I could. I know I can't, and
Yeah.
a lot of the people I come across also can't. And I hate to think that if you can't do it that way, that there's no other way to be an amazing artist, sensitive and thoughtful and inquisitive, rigorous artist.
Yeah.
Because that would be so sad.
Definitely.
If that wasn't possible, unless you had means, financial means and independent wealth to be able to do that.
Yeah, definitely. And it pegs a question of, because we do often say that there are not that many people that take up dance professionally within the South Asian community, but that is also linked with the fact that we're very academic. There's a whole migration aspect to it, and there's a whole social stigma to it. But taking that aside, there is a reality of the artist's life, and when you grow up thinking that this is the only way to practice the art form, and perform the art form
and be good at it.
and be good at it. It can limit your perception of how you can actually, what that dance can mean to you and how you can portray that and what you can do with it.
I think sometimes we kind of romanticize the idea of being an artist and, you know, the beauty of discovering your voice and all of those things. And it can feel ugly to think about the realities of why and what might hinder that process. I think for me, what I struggle with a lot and what I feel is quite dangerous is to equate how good someone could be with their means. And I know for me, I've had to work really hard to do the things that I'm doing. And yes, of course, there's been support. I'm not going to say that I'm at completely one end of the spectrum or the other, but I'm definitely, you know, self-made in many ways, financially anyway. And yeah, I guess I feel like it would be a shame, and it scares me when people think that there's only one way to be great, and that if you don't do those things, you won't be. But it also, you know, it does take time and effort and a different kind of mentality, I think, to do it full time, especially when it isn't going to come easily, you know, in terms of financial wealth or whatever that might be.
And without the comfort of a constant guidance.
Yeah. And I think that goes sort of hand in hand with needing to be ambitious and entrepreneurial and fight for it, really.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that fight and that ambition and that kind of whatever, all the things that comes with, can sometimes be a sort of disconnection point with the teacher you begin with.
Yeah.
I think of it not just in the teacher relationship, but anytime if someone needs you and then they don't, it can feel jarring. It can feel like an affront, disrespectful if they go somewhere else, all of those sorts of things. But I think that it's sad to think that, you know, someone that has nurtured you would also get to a point where they don't support you anymore because you have other desires and other ambitions, or you know, whatever the reasons might be.
Yeah, definitely.
These things end up being miscommunications, they misunderstandings, a kind of, you know, differing of perception. And it's sad because it can often lead to animosity or disconnection from something that is really important and has shaped a lot of people. And, you know, I think someone, like I said, if and when these things happen and there's a disconnection, and I talk to young dancers who are in that place, I really see a grieving.
Definitely.
And I've felt it, you know, it is a grieving of something when you don't have that support and that relationship anymore. And grief just takes time to get over.
Yeah.
But it also takes a shift in perspective and maybe having to find other avenues. There's no one answer.
No, definitely. It's a very individual experience for everyone. I guess there's also, if you do choose to take it professionally, in whatever context that might be, it's finding your community outside of your guru and their students, and then your community within your peers and your colleagues, and just finding what works for you as well, because you can grieve the loss of that guidance and that family. Like you said, it's really a family relationship, and often it's the community that you miss. It's their love, it's their wisdom, it's all of that combined. And you can try and find it in different ways, but it's never about replacing. It's about trying to find a different avenue that may also work for you in a different parameter. And I know that within SBD, we really try to open up classes so that those that are professional feel like there's a community within London, which is quite big, and it can feel isolating, like we talk about a lot, trying to sustain a professional career. When you're not always in the studio with people, you're not always in a company with Bharatanatyam dancers or whatever your classical, Indian classical dance might be. So it's about trying to find whatever works for you in a way that's healthy and sustains your practice and sustains you, more importantly, which is a really interesting point. I also question whether you think, it's not even a you think, it's just putting it out there, of within this context of the industry that we have, and you do really have to be ambitious, you do really have to look for avenues to find work that is not always going to be classical work in the way that you want it to be. How you continue practice in that way without a guru who you can go to and you take classes with every day, and you're building, I don't want to say knowledge, but you know what I mean. How do you still continue that?
I mean, I think you have to try different things. And when I say try, it's not just about thinking about trying it, it's about actually putting it into practice. I think there's a lot of good ideas and good intentions and wishes out there, but sometimes you just need to make it happen. You need to book that studio, you need to get some people together, you need to find this way of doing it, and understand it won't feel or be the same as it was, because I think there are people trying to replace that feeling with something else, and I just don't know if that's a fruitful endeavor, really. But kind of understanding and being really honest with yourself. What do what do you need to be doing just on a minute, like a day-to-day basis, in the minutiae of it, in terms of technique? What might you need to do in terms of filling your cup artistically? Is it that you need to be watching things or listening to music, in a particular kind of music, to inspire you? What are you engaging with? Because I think it's easy to get in a slump about it, and, like I said, grieve and mourn something and then feel like nothing will hit that mark.
The grit is really important, but also finding ways to constantly nourish yourself. That's a whole different way of thinking. And also thinking of, like, how am I improving? Because as dancers, you do technique to sustain a practice, but also you want to get better. You want to find your own way within the dance. So ensuring that you're sustaining it in a way that you are also improving, and you're not just honing on the wrong technique.
It's funny because I think
things like
that.
Yeah.
I think that, I see a lot of dancers sort of, pass through my doors to talk about different things. And I guess I'm just the sort of person that feels like I'm never good enough. And there's always something to, like, look. And so over the years, I've tried to be really kind of look into whatever technique things to help me dance at whatever stage I am. So, my body doesn't do what it used to do. So I need to understand, well, what does work now. And there are other people who think they're really good at some things and then are in environments where they're not being challenged or pushed, and that there's not a real sort of honesty about what they might genuinely need to improve, because they're not in an environment where that's being reflected to them. And that normally that environment is with your teacher, but often in a peer situation that may not be something that's reflected, and that's why you need to be really quite kind of open and honest with yourself, and aware. And you might need to put into place a way to have an external awareness of that with people you trust. And that's, again, hard to find those people in that tribe. And so, nourishment comes, development, growth, all of those things comes from different places, and it comes from different places through either a lack of something, whether it's a lack of opportunity or space or time or money or whatever. It can come through a forward motion thing, which is like a desire to and a hunger for these things.
Yeah.
It's not always in the shape that you're going to imagine growth to come in.
Yeah.
But unless you kind of go and do something tangible, it's just a cerebral exercise. Maybe you do need to think, well, how can my development of Abhinaya work? For me, I put myself out there and I did a play. And I was lucky enough to get a role, and that I worked with a director who helped sort of excavate a character. And I wasn't going to go down that road, but it was a really good experience for me to understand something about my Bharatanatyam.
Yeah.
When I explored a different understanding of my body through something else, I tried to bring that back into my experience of Bharatanatyam, not to dilute it, but to refine it in a way that made sense for me.
Also to enrich that experience.
Yeah. And so there's so much, it's just so many hurdles. It can feel insurmountable.
Yeah.
And I feel like that often. I feel like I don't have it in me anymore. I don't know how to do this or get better or be okay with where I'm at. Yeah.
That's a really vulnerable place to be at as well. A really vulnerable place to be at, because to also find the motivation through that, but also to take care of that is hard.
And it's lonely.
Very.
Because especially, when you're not just carving out a time, like let's say you might go to India for 3 weeks or something and work with a teacher, and you don't have the same sort of responsibilities you do when you're wherever you live otherwise. You can sort of just zone in, but how do you have a practice when you do have other things to do and other responsibilities? And people do it all the time. It's not like it's impossible. People have children and make it happen. People have caring responsibilities or injuries or whatever that might be. It just takes that bit more, and you need to know how to ride that sort of ebb and flow. I think it's just when it gets too heavy on you and when it feels too much, it can feel paralyzing.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess there's a growth in that too. As an artist, as a person, you grow from these experiences, and it impacts who you are as a person, and hence how you perceive your art and do your art. So while it's hard and challenging, it doesn't mean that it's not, it doesn't mean it's always a negative experience.
No, and I think this is not just in dance. I think this with everything. There's a lot of information coming at us.
Yeah.
It's hard to sort of find quietness or find a bit of space. And to do that, we need to actively make that happen for us. Because if we just if we did nothing, then it will just be bombarded. And this desire for knowledge and getting better and improving can also be hindering sometimes, because it's this sort of like, it makes you tired and you don't get anywhere sometimes, and that's I think there needs to be this sort of, like I said, sometimes when you're in a place when you can grab that knowledge and it's there, that's one thing, but knowledge can flourish and grow with a bit of space as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Time to just digest it.
Yeah, definitely.
I think especially South Asians, I think, we're often quite kind of
on it.
Yeah, kind of high achieving. There's this sense of like improving all the time. And I think improvement is important, but it's not always going to happen in the ways that you think.
Yeah.
And
it doesn't make it any less valid, because that's the only way you know of improvement. There are different ways of improvement that you'll learn throughout your experiences. Yeah, and I think that's a really lovely way to look at it, that it's just a different path.
Yeah, I think one of the things I was a bit nervous about this conversation around the Guru Shishya relationship, and because I know that there is a lot of sort of turmoil within these relationships around the world, and that there almost becomes factions of holding on to tradition and the fact that, you know, well, if you don't believe in the Guru Shishya relationship working for you, then you're against tradition and all of those sorts of things. And I think it's just such a reductive way of thinking of it. And, you know, pitching modernism to tradition or pitching Western to Eastern thinking, and that I just think it's a bit more nuanced than that. And we as diasporic people especially are really in, you know, in a complicated sort of headspace about it at any given time. And so I was nervous to talk about this because it's not like I'm saying it's good or bad.
No.
I think, like everything, there are aspects that can be manipulated or misused, abused, and there are beautiful things that also come out of it. When, you know, when it's good, it's great, and when it's bad, it's awful. Like most relationships. And I think within all of those complications, you need to keep reminding yourself, well, what is it that you love about the dance, about the art? Are you checking in on yourself that you know, maybe 10 years ago you did want to dance at this particular venue and do this particular thing, and 10 years have passed and you're like, it's just become a sort of blueprinted it kind of thing within your body that that's the thing you wanted, but in that time it may well have changed. I know that when I experienced that sort of change, where I was like, oh, I don't want the thing I've wanted for 10 years, but I didn't realize when that happened. It can feel again a bit kind of strange.
But yeah, it's like you're saying, you're not saying it's bad or good. It's just, it's natural. The same argument comes in when people talk about the art form itself, and it needs to evolve with time, whether that needs to happen or not, or how you hold on to traditions with evolution, I think, is something that seeps into everything. But yeah, it's been really interesting talking to you, actually. I think it opens a lot of questions for different people. It's definitely makes people feel less isolating, as you said, because it can be very lonely in this industry.
Yeah.
But also, I think it's a good way to just know that everyone has different paths, and they're all very, very valid in themselves. And you just have to find the right one for you, wherever that might be.
I think where you have to find that inspiration, you have to find your people, and they may not always be where you think they're going to be. Or where you've experienced them to be for, you know, however many 10, 20 years or whatever.
And to keep questioning yourself, the art form, what you want from it, just to keep questioning everything. Because like you're saying, if dreams change, that's fine, but you need to recognize that they change. Yeah, really insightful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me to talk about this.
Of course, of course.